live. We're live. Okay.
Have an introduction or should
Yeah, we'll do like a little introduction. Thanks everybody for coming. Obviously you all know me. Welcome to my show. Be speaking with Taylor Morrison today, also known as We Open on Instagram. Thank you, Owen, and the Green Lodge for having me do this solo show. It's such a privilege and super grateful. I figured we could just kind of jump into it.
Hey, John.
Hey.
We know each other from kind of not a long time, but like from growing up around each other, right?
I think we met like just in the upstate art scene, going to like the Second Street studio shows. I think you had one
right.
like right after or during COVID. It was like fall 2020 or 21, and people are still trying to figure out how do we do social gatherings during the pandemic.
Yeah, I remember thinking like, this is like a nice, cool show for me in Troy. I have to wear a mask though. but yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that we kind of were in the same scene and met kind of late. I met you and you were like kind of an MFA still? Or?
I think I was still at St. Rose or had just graduated.
Okay. Yeah, anyway, just thought that was kind of cool. I wanted to ask you to start, why visual art?
Why visual art?
I mean, like, still images. Do you know what I mean? You have an interest in digital, mimetic, very moving things, but they're still, and a lot of digital art is in that realm of things moving. And your work is like, speaks to those kind of glitchy moments in digital art where we see and like that's a lot about it. You capture it and you make it still. And I think about that when I'm making things, like, why am I still making still images in this world of, like, you can do so much with moving things. And
yeah, totally. I guess I started visual art because I got obsessed with the history of modern art, like in later middle school, early high school. Kind of, I don't know, I was interested in like Lady Gaga in middle school and the idea of like Andy Warhol, and that got me interested, like, what's the history of this, or maybe like pop culture, and it got me into the history of modernism. And
Lady Gaga got you into the history of modernism.
Yeah, partially it just seemed kind of like liberating. In a sense, like, you could kind of just do whatever you want and be expressive.
I see.
And it's like a music component to it too. But yeah, it got me thinking about doing art more. It's also a time I was experimenting with manipulating images because, I don't know, I've always really liked...
Well, I'm thinking of the Andy Warhol... I was going to say Mona Lisa. Monroe. Like he did a lot of those, and a lot of them are like this. A lot of them are shifted. And
off register.
Before the computer glitch was an idea, it was a screen printing glitch, or he printed a lot of ways, but I can see that. I mean, I immediately, shifting an image is something he did a lot anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and also like as a team too, like it was a collective labor effort as well, where, for me, I was just kind of a kid interested in like distortion and texture for some reason. I don't know. It just felt satisfying to edit photos or put like effects on them and see what I can do with it, not thinking it was... I just like to do it. I didn't know if it was like good or whatever, and they're probably all really bad.
Well, I mean, you got obsessed, obviously, which is so cool. I mean, like, and an interesting thing about your art is it does seem like you got obsessed with something that seems very unlikely, or like, what are you? I know you're obsessed with, like, especially with these two, you know what I mean? And just looking at all your work, it's like, there's something he is, maybe it's texture, maybe, I think there's a lot more to it, but you're after a thing, for sure. And the fact that it happened so early, like, I just like editing photos, and you're still you're still on that. It seems like something, I don't know, it speaks to the imagination, in a sense. Like, you can choose anything, you know, and if you just keep doing it, it becomes, this whole world.
Definitely,
Do you see it do you see your work in that way? Like,
yeah, sometimes I'll look back at old work, I guess, like from the past few years ago, and I remember thinking, like, at the time, like, oh, this is shit, like, what's the point? And I would throw it away, but then I would look at it like years later and be like, oh, that was kind of interesting and good. I should have pursued that, but I discredited it. So it's kind of like self-esteem thing in a way, and trying to think of that now ahead of time, of just like sticking with something and trying to edit it and work through it instead of just disregarding it. And with that is trying to be more prolific too, instead of just obsessing with one thing and killing it. Just make something and just keep making other things instead of getting too fixated. So I do feel obsessed, but there's like a positive and negative aspect to that. It's like I kind of have to keep moving between things and circle back, so I have like a fresh look at it. Because I do that a lot. Sometimes I'll just overwork. I see. Something.
It's more of a process. It's more of the process that you get obsessed with.
Yeah.
And the content material is what you feel you can speak with at the moment or something? Or?
Yeah, like moving to fabric. Like before doing this, I was doing more sort of wall sculpture stuff with plaster and found objects and making these improvised assemblages. And during that time, I was moving like apartment to apartment every year, and I was running into the consequence of sculpture is that it's like a 3D object, obviously, like it's so obvious, but having to move it and store it became like overly stressful because moving is so stressful. And I was thinking, I just need to use a lighter, more flexible, easier to manage material. So the choice of using fabric actually came from like a practical place for myself, but also kind of as like a return to 2D in a way that doesn't fully sacrifice like sculpture or the 3D, because like tactility is important to me, and to touch things and there being different surfaces, as opposed to making just a painting that's all the same sort of surface texture. With fabric, I could make different surface textures. Right. You can do that with painting, but it felt more immediate for me with the fabric, and using it in a collage method like I have been for a while now. It just seemed to make sense. And plus it kind of gave me a limitation to making something two-dimensional that's somewhat rectangular and on the wall, as opposed to something sculptural 3D in the round, not knowing exactly when it will end or like how contained it will be. The coming to the rectangle just gave me a limitation, I guess. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I thought of three things. Mm-hmm. The first thing was when you were talking about using the fabric as a practical medium. I was thinking, the rug. Like there was a time when fabrics were a trade item, very the Silk Road, you know. There is that is part of the, like, I mean, just the fabric has such a history. I mean, we stretch fabric over stretchers to make paintings. You know what I mean? There's something about it that is pre-art almost, and it's interesting to then hang them like this again, very art, very like, oh, this could almost be a stretched piece of fabric. I think that I'm going off on something else. I had two other things, but
No
oh God, I think I lost it. Well, anyway, I go to the second thing. I think. Oh shoot, I lost that too. Give me a second here. I think, in terms of the fabric, it being the oldest is really what I'm trying to say. One of the oldest, and then the broken phone screen is one of the newest ideas in art. It's fast moving. That's what I was going to talk about. It's built to travel the fabric, and so are the phones. You know what I mean? I'm just making connections now, but it makes me wonder, when you said tactility, do you want people to touch these? Like, are they for touching? Is the screen for flicking? Because it's so on this edge of being about either digital or the most tactile place in art, which is wrapping yourself in a woolly blanket. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's a complicated question. I don't even know if it is a question, but
I have thoughts.
Yeah, I wonder how far down that goes for you. This combination, because it is such a two extremes. Do you know what I mean? Like quilting and making clothes is as old as being human, and like the broken cell phone is like post technology. You know what I mean? It's almost speaking to like a time when these will just be dead artifacts in the future. Anyway, yeah, time and
I mean, like like fabric production is crucial to computing. Like there was the invention of the jacquard loom, I believe. I don't know when, in the 1800s, but it was like a mechanical loom. It was like one of the first instances of something that was kind of automated.
Okay.
So I forget what year it was invented, but it would be like automated by these like punch cards. So like these, I don't know if they'd be made of paper or wood or something, but they would have holes in it, and they would be in a sequence connected by rope, and they would just like, I don't know what they would go through, but they would move, and the holes in the cards correlated to a certain pattern, like the warp and the weft with the rug or the fabric would be almost. Yeah, like a player piano. Okay. So it would be correlated to like the information of the holes in these punch cards, and that inspired like early analytic computing, like the way computers would function, and also just like the way like woven fabric is made. Like warp and the weft is binary. Almost like it's well, it's like almost like a pixel. Okay, yeah. To the way woven things are. So I'm not super articulate about it, but there is that intersection, and I think like the way the workers reacted to that being introduced into, I guess, textile factories was, I don't know, I don't remember the exact historic information, but those workers, some of them like would destroy these looms.
Let me guess, they didn't appreciate it so much. Right?
No, because it was taking like their jobs from them, and they became known as the Luddites, I believe. I think that's where
the people that didn't want the automated loom is where Luddites come through.
Right, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think I could be incorrect, but I believe that's true. So I think that's like curious, the way, you know, industrial fabric production, you know, was helping introduce
part of
computing.
the computing history anyway.
Yeah, I don't think
interwoven, if you will.
Yes, exactly. I don't think this work is exactly like about that or speaking to it, but I do think it's like an interesting like point of reference.
You mean speaking of that specific historical story?
Yeah, I don't think my work's speaking to that, but
Right.
it's an interesting point of contact to make, like fabric's relationship to
as
what will be
as
digital.
long as we're diving into that connection.
Digital technology, and it is one of, you know, it's an old medium, or like sewing, you know, being invented by using the, like the tendons, or I forget what it's called, on like the back of the legs of deer, they would like make threads out of that, and use sinew. The sinew, the deer sinew, and make needles like out of bones and like the deer skin. They would make people would make clothes out of. So I'm interested that
the equator that became
like, I don't know. Yeah, I like
part of it.
That connection to like the deer as well. I have like some deer scattered in here, but also it's just like a local, you know, common creature.
How often are you thinking about cavemen is my question.
I don't really think of I don't know, I don't think of cavemen.
No, I know, okay.
But I guess with this stuff I was thinking just like about grass, obviously, about deer, about sheep a lot, and the different metaphors that we culturally like project onto them, but also my own imagining with them. And I don't know how much they come across in the work, but just for me to be working through is, I guess, something I like to reference or maybe speak through a little bit.
I guess, again, thinking about livestock is extremely old human thing to do too.
Well, it's like a technology too, like the domestication of animals and as plants is maybe something we don't immediately assume as a technology, but or we don't assume as like unnatural or artificial, but they're needed to take like effort over time to create those conditions. Like there's an evolution of our relationship with nature, or so-called nature, and animals, and using them to our benefit.
Cool. I love how your work has that kind of like almost Neolithic, you know, little post-Neolithic into agriculture, like cycle of thinking. And then it's also got the broken cell phone, you know what I mean? Like that is really the generator of your work for me, is having both of these things simultaneously going on. And in the best example, I think this is probably one of the best examples for sure. But yeah, I mean, and I don't know, I'm trying to think of like other things that really do this like parallel history thing in the digital. I mean, another question is, do I even call your art digital art? In a lot of ways I want to, but so much about the content, and again, that like I do just get a strong Neolithic vibe, and the painting feels like, you know, someone with their finger with soot or something, you know what I mean? And so do I call your work digital? Do you think of your work as digital art?
It's an interesting question.
Because I know you print digital images, like a lot of digital artists would.
I wouldn't consider these digital art because it doesn't live in a digital space. It lives in our meat space, IRL. But also shout out to the ontological turn. I don't know if they're watching, but they brought up a couple of days ago they're drafting this piece, considering the difference between internet art and then art about the internet.
Right.
And they're interested in my work in regards to this, and I don't completely remember their thoughts, but I don't know if you know who I'm referring to.
I speak to him in DMs sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are interested in the core online phenomena.
That's basically who I know, why I know anything about any of that is by talking to that person.
Yeah.
He's definitely like scholar of it. I think I've talked about him before.
Yeah, they're working on that. Super sweet, and included me in a nice publication through Becoming Press about it. But I mean, I do make like digital collages, and they do exist on Instagram, online.
Right.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I the reason I asked is I kind of had that medium boundary dissolved for me at a certain point with projection art, where I've talked to a lot of artists that are projecting onto surfaces or using the light from a projector. They can, and like I've asked them, do you consider your work digital art? Some of them do, because and I would also say that that the reason it breaks that medium barrier is because it's, when I put my hand through it, that might see my shadow, or it can be interacted with physically, and so people are, I don't know, and so I wonder, is the idea, maybe internet art is maybe the better term, because like digital art is very stuck in people's minds as things that are made in a digital way and are presented on a digital platform. But yeah, all I'm saying is I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Like I think we're figuring out, or people are thinking about digital art and how to put it into the world now. I think that's and I'm wondering if that's something that you ever think about with what you're doing. Like I really want to get the digital into people's physical presence. And
yeah, kind of. I mean, it's just, the world we live in, it already happens whether it's in art or not.
That's true.
You
don't have to do that.
We're carrying these things around like there's waves and Wi-Fi and things, information we can't see always moving. And they have like a physical effect on us, even though we may think of them as immaterial, like phenomena. Data and information is super physical. Like it's very much human. Like they take up a lot of space, and it takes a lot of labor to create the means for it to prevail and to subsist. So it's interesting. Like there's almost like a commodity fetishism thing where we want to disassociate the physical from digital media and think it's immaterial again, but it's like super physical. It's just kind of not it's not present for us. And I think that's interesting, like in an illusionistic kind of sense.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, all sort of objects do that. We don't think about their labor too much. We just kind of enjoy it as it is.
Like the vegetables in the supermarket are there.
It's just, but, everything has to be made, obviously. But to go back to the comment, I think, like, digital art and the internet or whatever technology is like all part of the process for me to get to having made these pieces. I definitely don't consider it internet art because it exists here more physically than that, and they have a better impact in real life. But I wouldn't reduce them to calling them art about the internet. Either. It seems maybe more so in between, maybe more in like an day sense, like in the sidewalk one, one can imagine narratives about it.
Yeah.
Being outside, going on a walk.
Then here's like a 4chan face.
Yeah, almost like like an NPC Wojak figure riffing off of, like the information and the internet is like a mundane spectacle, like at the same time somehow. And I feel like I feel more gratified making them into physical fabric, tactile objects, because it feels, I feel like I have to put more work into making it. It feels more embodied than making something solely on a screen, which feels a bit more detached. Not to say like there isn't successful work that is like, say, video or digital collage or AI or whatever, if it fits like a certain concept. But at least for me, I like to do that stuff. But the more I practice sewing and collaging with fabric, that stuff becomes more secondary and almost acts as like a sketchbook or drawing to get ideas. And it's also becomes content too. So while I'm making physical things, I have things to share that can circulate and be in the network more so than these more I guess now like they'd be more traditional, in the tradition of like contemporary American European wall art or whatever you want to call it. I need to like fulfill both needs of the more of the fast paced nature of online, Instagram, internet experience with the digital collages I can share, but then the more slower, more personally gratifying, labor-intensive pieces, which I think go beyond just solely being art about the internet, because at least with this stuff, there's more, I'd say, metaphorical or maybe emotional things that point in other directions than solely the internet, even though there may be like a phone or something referencing the online space, or just be a source from a digital image like originally. But I liked them to kind of go beyond that and speak about maybe more broader things. I guess like I'm afraid of just being like captured by, I guess, maybe that category too.
I guess I wanted to make you squirm a little bit under the category.
Good. Good.
But like I said, I think you go, I don't know if you go beyond the internet, but you have more, for me anyway, at least one other complete, like I said, sort of history or dynamic that I get involved with. And then as soon as what takes me out of that involvement is an involvement with like the new age. Like I don't start looking at the sheep anymore. I see that it's part of a pixelated image, you know what I mean? Like it's not like I don't know if it's purely Dutch, but like those quilts that have like, just like diamonds and squares, and it's almost referencing that with its, geometrical patterning, but I know it's digital. I know it's bit art. It's 8-bit, it's 6-bit. It's like, one of these squares is an 8-bit square. And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking about that. So it's about the internet, and it's about who we are before, what the internet came from, which is people that were just sitting next to sheep all day. You know what I mean? Like that's how the internet was made, and a longer view of things was taking enough time with the sheep.
Basically,
Anyway, I was gonna say, like, again with that digital connection, it sounds like maybe it's more about. Are we looking at time? Are we good? Or?
Oh no, I think we're good.
For you, it's not so much making a specific connection so much as it's about setting these two, or I don't mean to place that idea that it's about, some of it's two things, but setting things against each other and letting them run, basically, and seeing the connections that are possible, as opposed to making a connection yourself and depicting it. That's the sense I get. And what you said earlier about process, and that, just getting into the sewing and getting into the tactile nature of it. It brings up the question for me: does this have a statement, or does the show have a statement about that connection, about those connections, about the immaterial versus the material world? Or is it, I'm going to put the material versus the material world up against each other in a few ways, and you're looking still?
It seems
both are equally valid to me.
Yeah, I think there's like a number of like dualistic relationships at play.
Yeah.
It seems like we're almost trained to think in that way.
It could be dualistic or triistic.
No. I mean, it makes it easier to understand concepts thinking.
Yeah.
In that way, such as, technology versus nature, or digital versus physical craft. In terms of a statement, I guess I'd like to say I'm not so pro or anti like technology, or pro and anti like going back to nature sort of ideas. I don't want to be like a full-on like accelerationist, or like a full-on maybe traditionalist. I think for me it feels more realistic that we exist between these forces, so to speak, and they're always influencing each other. They're always conflicting. They're always working together in different tendrils and going down different avenues. I'm more interested in thinking of it that way, and instead of being like, everybody's got to touch grass, everybody's got to go outside, everybody's got to, everybody can't be a sheep and like be online all the time. I think like that, it's kind of boring and cliche, and I'm interested in playing with the cliche of, say, like what a sheep means. Like, is it, usually it's used as like a pejorative, like if you're following, like if you're passive to some ideology that everybody's following, or status quo. Or it could be looked in as like a positive sense, like you're part of a collective and a group of people and have like a sense of belonging in a world that's trying to atomize you. But it's also like like a metaphorical, allegorical creature that within European history a lot of symbolism is placed into, or in Christianity a lot of symbolism is
you've got the sacred lamb right there.
Yeah, and like
in the crown of thorns.
Yeah, so I'm interested in like using symbols that can have an open-ended meaning or interpretation, and that goes along with this relationship between like a binary or a dualism, whatever. Like when I was making like this piece, I was starting in a place of thinking of Manet's Luncheon on the Grass, so the famous and at the time controversial painting that historians point to as being one of the beginnings of modern art or modernism. It was like controversial the way Manet was playing with space, and how the figures were depicted in space, and how it was almost like he was cutting and pasting figures and putting them on. So like there's that collage aspect to them, but also just the content of the painting itself. It's like people outside, like touching grass and like playing with that idea in like a tongue-in-cheek way. And also like oh, one can be on a quilt, like having a picnic, like outside, hence the quilt, or, you know, sheep, like, eat grass too, they're outside, so I'll, like, have wool, and, like, oh, I'll paint the dye on and reference, like, a painting, so I'm thinking and trying to pack all, like, these ideas in kind of a chaotic way, and that's
what makes me want to number them, because I think that's what like the dualism thing. I was like, I see you do understand all of your references so well, like what your material means, and you call back to it, and there's so much to like that. Like the sheep means things. The wool for the thing comes off a sheep. It eats the grass. You know what I mean? There's each element connects to so many other parts of the image. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And so it makes me think in this cyclical way. I think is why I'm doing this thing. It's like I keep returning to different meanings. Things keep cycling through what they mean, what they're about. Is this lamb the same as that lamb? Do you know what I mean? Like,
they're all different. Yeah. Each sheep is unique.
I know they're different, but it's like it's just so cool that, you know, you can use sheep in two different works of art in your same show, and they're just vastly different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's like I want it to be left sort of open-ended, and some, you know, a viewer can use their imagination to make connections, but I'd like to repeat some symbols in the work throughout the show, and a narrative can be like loosely woven. There isn't like an explicit story or tale I'm trying to tell. It's more of a network of symbols you can have a relation to, instead of like imposing a narrative you're supposed to follow in a linear way.
Usually when I hear that, like, I want to leave it like open to interpretation. Like I used to, like, I don't know, I'm sure it's like much more complicated than that, but that phrase always makes me like uneasy now, of like,
well, it's like a cliche.
It is kind of like a cliche. Or like,
it's like, oh, it's just an open to interpretation.
Or I think in terms of making art, for me, I've realized like thinking about it that way makes me have to do less. Or like, you know what I mean? I've just noticed that can be kind of like and I think that's why they ask the question, is it a statement, or is it like what you said and what it feels like, which is a discovery. You know what I mean? Like you're putting things. It's like not a treasure hunt. Again, I kind of reduce things sometimes, but like a treasure hunt is vast in terms of what it means and what it is. But yeah, it's more of it's like you said, like you walk around and you develop something, and you've given enough like of the same characters and the same, you know, feeling, to feel like there might be, you're on to something is maybe what it is. Sometimes I think when we leave art, like, I'm just going to make it something that's very open into interpretation. This is what it means to me, but you know, it's going to mean anything to other people. If that's sort of an intention, or not even intention, but gets to almost that point, you can start to lose track of what you're doing. Here you don't. You know what I mean? I mean, I can see it in some places. Maybe in this one I start to see like a losing track. You know what I mean? I don't know if this doesn't have to turn into a crit. I don't know, it's your show. But yeah, like going more with I want to set something up for people to just feel. And that's what it is, and it'll be part of a bigger thing, and it's not. Maybe it doesn't have to be so. What happens is it doesn't have to be so intentional for you. It's because, like, you know, this little section, or whichever one is like that a little bit more, can end up feeling like the part of the whole that fades back.
Yeah, I mean, like when I'm working on a piece, like, it means something to me, and I'm following that. To kind of give me a thematic visual structure, but I don't feel super authoritarian of that clearly coming through for everybody. You know, I want there to be the freedom to people to read into it. And I think that's the beauty of a lot of art, and, you know, more interesting art, because it creates more of a conversation instead of something you could easily consume and be done and dispose of it. So there is like a loose organizing principle with the pieces in the show, like using some of the same like creatures or characters or some of the same symbols, like the grass or the color green, and organizing it around that instead of it being super random.
Just a side note, I think fabric actually lends itself extremely well to that, like to the feeling of a you know, cohesion, like even almost more than like if it was like a wall full of paintings. Paintings have their own like, here's me, here's me. These, you know, they go like this through the room, you know what I mean? It ends up being just purely texturally, visually, you know, sensorially, they are more, you know what I mean? They flow together.
Yeah, and I like fabric for that reason, because it has a more of a utilitarian like reference. Not saying like these are objects you can practically use because it's art and like.
Do you want the person that buys this to like go to bed with it and like?
No, but I like that, you know, a quilt or a blanket like points to that too. Like, oh, this could be a useful object, but it's not because it's art, as opposed to way like painting is just
useless
painting.
Like art is, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of it. That's where all the value comes from, is that you can own an object that you don't have to do anything with. That's its freedom. Like, that's its perfect purpose. It's, you know, art for art's sake, or life for life's sake. Like, why does it have to have maybe a means to an end? It could just be itself.
I think I brought up that point of like letting it be open to interpretation, because I guess my view is that that's just going to happen. That's how art happens. There's no way for you to make something that isn't open for interpretation. People's experience of a word, if you just wrote like, no thank you on a black canvas, people's interpretations of that are still going to be vastly different from everybody. You know what I mean? You can make something that seems the most uninterpretable thing, but that's just not how minds work. We just interpret. We interpret differently.
It's just like, you know, ancient people people now looking at the stars, or making meaning out of this random kind of phenomenon, creating stories out of it, because it's grounding in a communal sense. We could share a language and stories about it, and, you know, there's like the cliche, or I don't know, idiom, metaphor, whatever, you know, the social fabric like of things. I don't know where I was going with that.
Social fabric,
But yeah, like I was saying earlier, like painting is almost better at pointing to itself as art, at least in, you know, the American European tradition, as opposed to, I guess, a quilt, which points to something you can use and don't regard.
Well, I mean, it points to every culture it's ever been. You know what I mean? I don't know, anyone's free of, you know, messing around with their sewing kit. That's a pretty universal art form, I think. I mean, like it speaks to, you know, quilt making and like like quilts, European quilts, but also like Native American quilts are like something that all the modern abstract artists were looking at. African textiles, all that stuff was key to abstract art, really. So I don't know where I was going with that either.
Yeah, that's something I need to dive more into. I think I kind of start with sewing or quilting or making these fabric collages more so as this feels like the most immediate, best way to express myself in ideas, more so than coming through it like history or trying to carry a historic torch. I mean, I've obviously been like influenced and inspired by quilt makers and textile artists.
Well, yeah, I mean, you don't have to carry it. You made the art. So that, you know, I mean, this is carrying the textile torch whether you want it to or not.
Right,
you know?
it's just doing it. Like, it doesn't have to be like intentionally historical. It's just a matter of doing a thing and it being documented through a certain medium or channel, whatever.
But you are, you know, it's through this conversation, I'm, you know, it's obvious you're aware of the medium, and it's important. Some of that history does come into account in your thinking. It's not that it's the whole point, but you are, you know what I mean, the elements you're working with are all specific to the mediums, to the content. I think, you're very, what would I say? It feels focused somehow, even though against all aesthetic reasoning, it shouldn't. You know what I mean? Especially this one, like, and I think I'm realizing it's coming from this cohesion of your understanding of your materials, the histories you're working with. You know, it's obviously not like a full extent, but like it's enough. You know what I mean? It shows that you don't need to know everything about everything,
right?
In order to add your own, you need to, you know what I mean? You need to be interested, and like know maybe slightly what you're doing in order to. But even if you didn't know anything, making a textile adds to that history. It's
that's something I have trouble with too. Sometimes I could put too much pressure on myself to be like, oh, I need like a very like rigorous concept to follow through on, and I need to do this research and yada yada yada, like academic stuff. Or I feel like school like almost trains you to make art that way, and there's great stuff that gets produced, but I feel like for me it just comes down to like material and like the art making itself, and that goes back to the art for art's sake sort of triumph. Like, you're not making it for the research per se, it's about the aesthetics itself. That should be like the priority more so than the concept, or like the concept or the aesthetics have to transcend the concept, or can't be too bogged down by it, or it would become more practical in that regards too if you're just using the concept practically to get a certain message across, instead of just being like itself and contain its own mystery. Maybe
it'd be tough to have a talk if we just said, I mean, it is about art for art's sake.
Well, I mean broadly, like all of our stuff is, but I guess it's more of like advice for myself and trying to get better at, instead of having that pressure of like, oh, it needs to mean like a specific thing. I need like a consistent body of work, and
I think if you're able to build, it's like, you know, build it for yourself. Build what you need for yourself. It doesn't need to be comprehensive. It just needs to work maybe for you and for, you know, we had this whole discussion about the histories, like I said, and like, yes, none of that might come through for even anybody, you know what I mean? Like, it's only because we're going into the concept, but, you know, I think having them, yes, it's true that it's not like, treating art as an academic pursuit, like you said, like using our school training to make a better work of art is probably not always going to work, or rarely, you know what I mean?
Or sometimes it's not interesting. Sometimes it could be so concept heavy and not visually engaging, and at least for me, like with my personal taste and preferences, like it falls flat, or I become disinterested, and I feel more interested in, I don't know, maybe things that are more visually moving and perplexing. Maybe I don't know how they did it, or I don't know, there's a complexity or a simplicity to it. I don't know. There's not really answers for it. It's the whole
Comes
point.
down to the object, the thing you made.
Yeah, and the way it can,
The
trigger
new-
your imagination, I guess, or bring you to another place. Like, that's the whole magic of it. Maybe instead of it being like an instructor or like an authority telling you something. I mean, it could be, and there's good art like that, but maybe it goes beyond it in a certain capacity, or maybe that's the point, but sometimes it falls through. But then also there's art without the concept, and it's not that good, and blah, blah, blah,
Right,
blah,
yes.
blah. But I think there's maybe a sweet spot, at least I think.
Probably for all of us, all artists. It's like a spot that find that works. You know what I mean? Like, cheap and cracked cell phones aren't everyone's storytelling mode. You know what I mean? But it's got its internal logic working for you, and it's clear. Do you know what I mean? It's clear through the work. It's tough to make something with this much internal logic without having it happening a little bit for you, and that's all I was trying to say. It's like it's like I can also tell you're very free of the academy. You know what I mean? Or like very free of like book learning for your art, right?
I don't know.
Which is I don't read books I think art either, but just an internal logic, like a short story would have that's written by maybe someone that doesn't know the entire history of writing, which is everybody. I mean, it's a very simple thing in the end that we're talking about. And also I wanted to talk about just maybe quickly, like, it goes back to something we were talking about much earlier, but you post images on the internet of things that are contained within your works like this. Like, I think I've seen bits of this posted as a internet or digital work of art itself, not knowing that it's part of this. How much of that is like, like what you're saying, like posting? What is that? You know what I mean? That's an odd thing. Because if I take a picture of one of my, like a little section of one of my paintings and posted it, it wouldn't work in that way, but yours do work in that way. Like, if I get a little section, I feel like I'm looking at a piece of digital glitch, like, art, and then I can kind of see it's maybe fabric, but even then that doesn't really change it so much because I'm seeing it on the screen, and it feels made for the screen anyway. That's a whole different, deeper thing. But
I'll talk about that, and I think we'll try and wrap it up.
Okay.
I don't know but maybe we'll do a little.
Probably got almost the hour mark.
Okay, yeah, we'll do maybe some questions if there is some,
That'd be
whatever. I think it's just, I guess I want to be conscientious of the times we're living in, and use tools that are accessible, like our phone, and communicate that way, I guess. And I like there to be a sense of fluidity between the digital sort of collages, images, sketches, process stuff, and then the fabric, the textile stuff. And I want to push it so maybe because at the moment it feels like sort of linear process, like the digital things end up into the fabric, and maybe less so like fabric things ending up being their own sort of digital art images content necessarily. I want to improve on there being more of that feedback. But also simultaneously I'm starting to think, like, as a goal, like, what ways can I maybe move away from images more, or solely relying on images, and maybe more drawing can enter the picture, or more of the degradation of the image can enter the picture. Because I think, like, it feels like very popular now. I'm seeing a lot of painting that's like of like digital images, and it's just like, well, I want to move
Right.
away from that a little bit, explore some different things, but not like completely reject it, but just maybe explore different territory.
Some questions, Ben?
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Questions.
Yeah. Sean?
I have 2 questions, but I want to get greedy since we just started. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So you mentioned core, which is the style of art that you showed me once. But it wasn't that long ago, and I feel like you've been making you've been developing on your style of art for longer than since you mentioned it to me. But anyway, like my understanding of core is that it like it's a style of like usually video art where it takes multiple like clips of different videos that seemingly don't have anything to do with each other in order to create like a larger feeling. Do you feel like your art, especially like some of the stuff right in front of us, is influenced by core and like, or could it be better understood through that kind of means of seemingly disparate images combining to create a feeling that you take in on a personal level?
I'm interested in like the core phenomena that came out of TikTok. I don't think I'm making core. That feels like very like video specific, and it's almost like referencing like early 20th century like the Dadaist movement of like the absurdity of images and content and like random videos you would find, and they're pieced together to create a large, bigger meaning that usually has like a critique of technology or consumption or environmental degradation. I think I might touch on those themes like more or less intentionally or accidentally, but I don't think I'm making that per se, even though I was put in like a
bit of an overlap.
I think I'm not saying I'm not inspired. I think like it's amazing, like the things people make and share as content, but then also what people find and piece together to create like a certain affect. And it's part of like this history of like video montage that's been going on for like 100 years now. But I guess I want to, make something more still or discrete from that in the physical work. Something maybe with more stillness, but still like point to the rapidity or the fastness of, content or doom scrolling or whatever. Or maybe, I don't know, I think it seems like my work gets pretty dark, but I'd like to personally and maybe aesthetically push things in a more positive direction. I don't know if that will come true or not, but that'll...
I do feel like, I think a lot of this stuff is pretty calming to look at, and I don't think it was just like complete absurdity that you're trying to message. My other question was, like at first when I was looking at a lot of this stuff, I had taken it as like that more like dualistic perspective you guys were talking about, of like, or maybe not dualistic, but kind of like contradicting themes. But then you had mentioned like the development of technology and how actually in some ways these like domesticated animals or farm animals are older technology and phones are newer. Do you feel, would you say that you're trying to communicate some sort of like seemingly dualistic perspectives actually being more monistic?
I wouldn't say monistic, but maybe I'm trying to understand like dialectics more in the way like two maybe seemingly contradicting or opposing forces actually are more in a relationship with each other and are evolving over time in different forms, but they're necessary to each other. So for instance, maybe there's an aspect of technology in nature, or there's also an aspect of nature within technology that move both forward. I mean, our phones are literally like rocks and minerals and like, you know, electricity and blah, blah, blah. And there is like a environmental impact of, you know, using and consuming, you know, technology, but maybe it could also be a way of maybe helping the environment, or I'm sure there's instances where it has positive impacts on the environment, or ways we're learning about like nature too. But I also like also thinking of nature in a less literal sense, and maybe in a more imagistic sense, or the way we tend to romanticize nature or have like an image of it in our heads, or an ideal form of it, the way we think of it, which there's like partial truth to it. Like we tend to go into nature to like de-stress and, you know, get away from the stress of work and whatnot, but there's also like a grotesqueness and a chaotic aspect to nature, and it goes beyond our understanding, or nature can be pretty brutal and things are always eating each other and decomposing, and there is like a darkness to it, or an uncomfortability to it, and I'm interested in including that as well, along with like the calming aspects of it in this technological way, or just like the fact that when we may think we're going into nature, like when we're going to a park, but it's also like, what is a park? It's very kind of regulated and ordered environment in nature. Like you're guided down trails in a certain way. It isn't just like raw, like untouched nature, or whatever, you know, in this romantic sense. So those are all things I think about, I guess. Yeah. Thank you, Sean. Yeah.
Kind of riffing off that, I get this sense in your work that things are less separated than we like to compartmentalize them. There's this common tendency to categorize things, but in your work, it isn't nature versus nurture. It's that this sort of is the new nature. All this technology is the way that we exist. And even in this talk, I noticed this tendency to be like, is it digital art? Is it tapestry? Is it painting? Your work seems to defy that like categorical tendency. Is that important to you to kind of unburden yourself of categories, and is it something you think about?
Sort of. I mean, yes and no. Categories are helpful for us to understand and communicate ideas for ourselves and to other people, but also they can box you in ways that aren't helpful. So yeah, like they're useful, like it's just helpful to think these are fabric collages, like of digital imagery. Like it's not internet art per se, because it doesn't exist on the internet, but it's referencing internet, but also things in real life. But those things in real life had to become digital for me to then have them printed out and become physical and again, but in a different sense.
I think this answer proves that he's right.
I don't know. I mean, I don't like lose sleep at night thinking like I'm in like a category or something. Yeah, I mean,
you do. You squirm against category for sure.
Yeah, but I like to see like the cultural terrain around me and see things that are trendy or not and respond to them or whatever. And it's kind of a lot of artists can't help but be part of like their zeitgeist and share like a common visual language. I think that just happens and is okay, but I think the downside of that is that you may not stand out from that tribe, maybe, and at least for me, I kind of maybe want to distance myself from some of those similarities. So it's kind of yes and no. It's nice to have there to be some commonality, but also like push away from it. And maybe everybody's kind of doing that or not. I don't know if that's really taking a position, but I think for me at least, it kind of like oscillates. I might get interested in something and try it out, and then I might react and be like, oh, I want to try something different.
I kind of like that answer because you're saying basically like there's times we want to be part of some discourse and there's times we don't want to be part of it.
Yeah, and like it's both can be helpful being part. I think like it's always important to have some like maybe critique at the end or some self criticisms too, just to grow and move forward or change or something. Yeah, thanks.
In like almost 5:10, maybe like 5 more minutes of movie.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. Cotter, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, having known you for a little bit and working with you, this openness that you have comes through in these works, and I love the fact that everything is of the same value, like even that black to these crudely painted images, to these very personal images. They're all, it's almost like Rauschenberg screens, like they all exist on the same spectrum, you know? And like even this really abstract piece, like Stewart's shops, I mean, nicotine, alcohol, ice cream. You know, it's like what am I trying to say? That piece is
That's pretty good.
That piece is very different. That's narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas these, which I love, by the way, there's just this. I see your hand all over these things. You're a serger. You're working with a serger.
Just a sewing machine and a
Okay.
embroidery attachment. I don't have a serger, but
Okay. You're doing that all by hand.
Yep. So just like
Okay.
back and forth. But yeah, I guess like hand is important. Just it gives me like a sense of control and agency, and I guess like it's an extension of ego and individuality, and part of like this history of the virtue and triumph of like the individual artist in our age we're going through still, as opposed to the way like images online like may come from anonymous sources or anonymous users sharing things, and anybody can share it, and there's like less of the individuals less important in a sense. It's more of like a collective network of sharing of images, and like many hands are important to, and digits and fingers are important to getting those messages and information across. But I like to like bring it back or something that's more tangible for me and embodied, I guess. But not to say I'm not interested in those things, but it helps me process that stuff in a more personal way with the sewing and the fabrics. Danielle?
I guess maybe it's because I'm staring at this corner a lot, but I see, and again the Stewart's thing, but I see a kind of like regional thing. Like I guess maybe if you could talk about like where you're from, like I see a kind of like backyard nostalgia kind of vibe coming through. I kind of like digging through the trash and finding it cool sort of vibe.
Yeah.
But also like I guess that's connecting me back to like 60s photorealist guys and painting like cars and driveways and a kind of almost Americana vibe, like doing ordinary scenes.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think before for a while, like I'm from Long Island, and like the beach was like a prominent aspect of the landscape, so I was using that as like an anchoring symbol in my work for a few years. But I was doing that a lot while I was going to school upstate, and there always felt like there was this detachment or distance from it or like I couldn't really source it immediately. So I was trying to come to terms with that and make stuff that was more tied to the environment around me. So, you know, more trees and woods and grass and sidewalks, and but also like this, you know, social media environment I'm in as well, and, you know, photographic one too. So yeah, wanting to bring those things too, but it's also like broad enough where I guess people who live around, I guess, green nature can connect with. But I started making this work after my partner Kelsey and I moved to Kingston, getting away from Albany, which has a more like urban, just like a more urban setting. Kingston's a little like, you know, it's in the Catskills, so that's an immediate connection. So that's important. And with the, like you mentioned, like history of 20th century American art, like that's important. Like in college, like Rauschenberg was a big influence in the way he played with images in a kind of cavalier yet thoughtful way, and how he was painting gestures over it and taking things from, you know, his social media at the time, just like television and newspaper, and reflecting that cultural environment, I think is still part of our language, and it's become more vernacular where anybody can do it. So I'm kind of, I guess, in that lineage, but I guess with this body of work was interested in working with specific symbols contained in that like approach to materials. So yeah. Thank you. Oh wait, one more.
Maybe from the back to back.
Yeah, sorry.
To the live end. So
All right, whatever.
I have a good rappy-uppy question,
Yeah.
I guess.
Rappy uppy, yeah.
Rappy-uppy. So obviously I've gotten to see your art kind of progress over time from the sculptures that you talked about to kind of like these textile collages to what you're doing now, which is really awesome. Is there anything that you haven't gotten to explore yet in your art, whether it be the process or an idea that you haven't gotten to explore yet that you want to move towards in the future?
That's a good question. Well, it's like simultaneously want to go more in depth with the sewing and the two-dimensional textiles, but also like wanting to try and experiment and branch out again. So maybe doing like soft sculpture too, or making figures, maybe, I don't know, like it's all hypothetical, or going back into like making more video or having some crossover with the fabric and like, I don't know if this will actually happen or not, but these are just ideas and things I've worked with and dabbled with in the past, so they could come back. I guess like at the moment I'm feeling strong and confident in developing my skills in this craft, and that feels gratifying, so I'll still do that, but I think it could also be helpful to branch out a little bit. Cool. Well, thanks. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Taylor, for doing this. Thank you, Green Lodge. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Hayley, for setting up the audio, providing all the equipment. Thank you, Kelsey, for all the moral, spiritual support, and doing the camera, getting the stickers. Yeah, a lot of people helped me out. I'm super grateful for all my friends that are here, and
Thanks, Owen,
all
for
that.
the Green Lodge.
The Green Lodge, Owen, thank you. That's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.